Oh, I'm just heating up some tea, so I'm going to pause for a second. Oh, I can't pause. It's just been too long since I read this book. Hi, everyone. Welcome to my channel. Oh, it sounds so weird. Got my hair cut. It feels weird. I don't know. It used to be long. Now it's not. I mean, it's still long. Today, I'm going to talk about some of the books that I've been reading for the Taylor Swift inspired Tis the Damn Readathon, which is super fun and has challenged me to read more books than I think by the end of this month, I will have read more books than I've read in a month, I think ever, which is great for me. I really I'm very competitive, so I like having the challenge of, getting it done. On the other hand, I don't really like the idea of book marathon because I don't like to rush. And I do feel a little bit like I'm rushing through books in a way that I'm not super comfortable with, which I know is not the point of this. It's supposed to be fun, but it's just my personality that's a little bit competitive, takes things a little bit too seriously, perhaps. So you can view the first video in which I explain the books that I'm choosing or chose for the readathon. So far, I have read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 books. We're just past halfway through the month, and I'm already almost halfway through 2 more books. And almost finished another one. So I'm definitely going to I think I had 10 picked out. I'm definitely going to be reading like 7 or 8 books this month. So I'm pretty excited about that because normally in a month I'll read 4 or 5 books. So, well, let's get into it, as they say. Let's get to the agenda. So this is the first book that I read. I don't think it was the first one I finished, though. The Glass Hotel is the first one that I finished. This is the first one that I started. This is Uncanny Valley by Anna Weiner. And it's a memoir about a young woman at the beginning of her career who originally was working in publishing in New York City and moves to San Francisco to start working in the startup. Really talks a lot about the culture in these in the tech industry, and also the way it is to be a woman working in this industry. And she works, I think, for just a data analysis company and then a social media company. I could be wrong about that, but it's pretty good and funny. I laughed out loud quite a number of times, and it's a little bit sad, and it definitely reveals some of the issues that women face in the work world, especially young women in tech. It also really exposes the agenda of this very capitalist driven industry. It's really about gathering people's data and companies being bought and sold for $billions, and it's juxtaposed in San Francisco with little vignettes of homeless people. She describes homeless people in the street, and in this way is able to contrast kind of how outrageous the gap really is between these people who run these companies and work in these companies, who have this tremendous amount of wealth, people struggling. And I think she also does a really good job of capturing loneliness and how isolating these tech industries and working in the tech industry kind of made her feel. So I have a bunch of tabs and I've marked a bunch of different quotes, and I'll just read a couple of them to demonstrate some of what I'm talking about. In terms of this idea of loneliness, which I think she captures really well here, she says, just when she describes what her life was like, what her day-to-day life was like, living and working in San Francisco, despite the fact that she had a boyfriend and she got along with her coworkers. She says, I eavesdropped on conversations in parks and restaurants, listened eagerly to strangers my age gossip about other strangers. I wrote long, detailed descriptions of nothing and sent them by email to friends. I went to concerts alone and attempted to make deep and prolonged eye contact with the musicians. I brought magazines to bars and sat by dingy electric fireplaces, hoping and not hoping that someone would talk to me. No one ever did. I thought that was very poignant. I think I've done many of those things or felt that way many different times in my life. And I think she does a really good job of being able to use language to explain or describe, the atmosphere of a generation and of us as human beings just living in this very tech-driven culture. She also describes what it feels like to be a woman working in tech, which I think she does really, really well. Here's another excerpt that demonstrates her ability to communicate, what it's like to be a woman versus being a man working in San Francisco at that time. In this excerpt, she's describing her boyfriend, so she later on does meet someone and has a relationship with this young guy who's also working in tech, and his name is Ian. So she says, as a software engineer, Ian had never encountered a job market with no space for him. He didn't know what it felt like not to have mobility, options, not to be desired. He loved what he did and could easily command 3 times my salary. No company would ever neglect to offer him equity. He was his own safety net. So she's giving that description in the context of, feeling like she can't leave her job and feeling like she doesn't know where she would go next. It's described really in the same way as you would think of like a golden handcuffs. You're getting paid a lot of money. You have options in a company that you're hoping will go public so that those options will become worth a lot, but you're working in a place that doesn't fit with your values, where you're not treated very well, where you feel like you're disposable and you feel like you're invisible. She also talks about the loneliness of technology. I thought that this was really, I found this really touched me because we've been living during pandemic times in an era where we're on Zoom all the time. And this description is so perfect for what I think a lot of people have been feeling. But this was before the pandemic. This is what it was like. She's describing what it was like to be in a video conference call. She describes, at the start of these meetings, I would log in and lean into my laptop, enjoying the camaraderie and warmth of a team. For an hour, my studio would fill with laughter and chatter, conversation tripping when the software stalled or delayed. Then I would stand up, stretch, tape back over my laptop camera, and open the curtains. Adjust to the silence, alone in my room. So yeah, I found that she's a really good writer, and I found that a lot of her descriptions were really poignant in terms of being able to describe a collective experience. It shows an example of what I meant when I said she did a good job of juxtapositioning these really wealthy young tech CEOs, mostly young white men, of course, the kind of poverty that she was seeing around her all around San Francisco. She describes, late one morning on the way to HQ, I spotted a middle-aged man in the light rail station wearing one of the Octopus Cat hoodies. So the Octopus Cat was the logo for the company where she worked. He was sitting upright on a piece of cardboard, a bent paper cup beside him, and was not wearing shoes. On his ankle was an open wound. Below us, I could see a train, maybe mine, pulling in. I rushed through the turnstile, wondering if I should have given him some money, then wondered if I only felt that way because of the Octopus Cat. It's pretty good. I think it's a really good, I would recommend it. I'm not super into giving reviews, like star reviews. I know that it serves a purpose. If I was forced to give this book a star review, I'd give it 4 stars. Why wouldn't I give it a 5-star? Just the only reason is that I did find the writing to be a little bit listy. I don't know if that makes sense, but it did feel sometimes like there was this kind of a rote approach to the writing. Not in the excerpts, of course, that I just read. And again, I think that the writing was very good in parts, but there were also parts where it just felt a little bit like she was listing things off in a certain way, or it was a little bit like a group of essays, perhaps. So in that way, the writing, it took me a little longer than I would have liked to read. So I think the pacing and that part of the writing could have been improved. But a really good memoir nonetheless, and a really good, what it's like to be a woman in tech, to be a young woman in tech, and also, where our society is going and where we are right now. And it tackles a lot of the issues, things like the wage gap, the pay gap, and just the ethics and the values that these companies adhere to, and it's the almighty dollar, right? So I would say, sure, give it a go. It's a good read. It was interesting. Now read a book with a morally gray character. So in this book, actually all of the characters, I think you could argue, have there's a lot of exploration of moral questions in this book. So it's essentially the story of Vincent and Paul. I found the story to be actually more about Vincent than it was about Paul. And it does in her style kind of go back and forth from different time eras to tell the story, and from different perspectives. I guess the running theme in the book is that all of the characters seem to be taking something from someone else that isn't theirs. And I don't want to give too much of the story away, but yeah, each of these characters is taking advantage of someone or something or a situation. And in many cases, these characters are stealing from other people, and that's why it's such a good book to read for that prompt of, morally gray characters. Initially I thought it would be the Jonathan Alkaitis character that was morally gray. He turns out to be actually corrupt. He's running a Ponzi scheme and he ends up in jail. The two siblings, Paul and Vincent, are kind of caught up in this strange human experience of, is this right? Is this wrong? Is it okay that I've done this? Is it not okay that I've done this? And most of the time it's not okay, the things that they've done, really, perhaps even in their own minds, and their souls seem to be, I don't know if I should say tormented, or if they're just, there's a kind of way that they're affected by it in terms of their happiness, perhaps. But it's very well written. It's very, very intriguing. I found that the pacing was really good for the book. Some people have some problems with the way that it was crafted, but I really didn't have a problem. And I do think that some of the writing was quite beautiful. So it's really about people living secret lives, keeping secrets from one another, revealing things to one another, sometimes to protect other people, but other times also to just maintain an identity that they don't want to share with other people. I'll just read you this excerpt. So this is about employees of Jonathan who knew there was some fraud going on but didn't know the extent of it, and people around him who still did the things in the office that they were told to do, but I question sort of why do we do the things we do, and why do we do things that we know are wrong. One of the characters is a character named Oscar who works for him, and this is about sort of his realization that he was involved in something bad. He walked toward the subway. He even thought about how he'd spin it. I realized there was fraud going on, he imagined telling an admiring future employer. And that was the day I walked out. I never would have imagined walking off a job like that, but sometimes you just have to draw the line. Although the line for Oscar had been crossed 11 years earlier, when he'd first been asked to backdate a transaction. It's possible to both know and not know something, he said later under cross-examination. And the state tore him to pieces over this, but he spoke for several of us, actually several of us who'd been thinking a great deal about that doubleness, that knowing and not knowing, being honorable and not being honorable, knowing you're not a good person, but trying to be a good person regardless, around the margins of the bad. We'd all die for the truth in our secret lives, or if not die exactly, then at least maybe make a couple of confidential phone calls and try to feign surprise when the authorities arrived. But in our actual lives, we were being paid an exorbitant amount of money to keep our mouths shut. You don't have to be an entirely terrible person, we told ourselves later, to turn a blind eye to certain things, even actively participate in certain other things, when it's not just you, because who among us is fully alone in the world? There are always other people in the picture. Our salaries and bonuses covered roofs over our heads. So I thought that was a really telling excerpt. And I think she did a really good job of pinpointing how hard it is to draw a line, how entangled we are in this capitalist system where we're forced to do things that are not morally or ethically commendable. So I thought she did a really good job of that in this book, and plus it's a really good story. It's got a really good sort of mystery within it about what happens to one of the characters, and I think the unfolding of it and the telling of it was really, really good. I think she's a really good writer, so I would recommend this one. I gave it like a 5 out of 5. I didn't have too much really negative to say about it, despite the fact that I know a lot of people felt let down about it after Station 11, which a lot of people loved so much. I thought it was really good, so I would recommend it. Can I just say, Rebecca. So this is the group read for the readathon, and I mean, I read this book in like 3 days. It's so, so good. I mean, I absolutely love Daphne du Maurier. I think she's an amazing writer. I think she is underappreciated. I can't believe how difficult it is to get copies of her books here I live in Canada, and it's hard to get copies of her books. Well, I mean, you can get copies of her books, but it's not like there's lots of copies floating around. I had read Jamaica Inn in just before the Christmas break, so I was really excited that this was the choice. I've been told that Alfred Hitchcock actually stole a lot of stuff from Daphne du Maurier and never credited her, which doesn't surprise me in the least. But yeah, she's brilliant. So let me just give you a little summary. Rebecca is the story of a young woman. The protagonist of the story, we never learn her name. She meets and marries a Mr. De Winter and becomes Mrs. De Winter. However, her husband had been married before to a woman named Rebecca. And our protagonist, I don't know what to call her because she doesn't have a name in the story. I guess I'll call her Mrs. De Winter, which is how she's referred to in the story. The new Mrs. De Winter has to follow in the footsteps of the old Mrs. De Winter, Rebecca, who died in a boating accident. She drowned, and after her death, she kind of left behind this estate and all of the servants, all of the, well, I guess they were servants, all of the people who worked on the estate, her household, all of the people in the town, in the small town where the estate was. The estate is called Mandel. All really adored her, or at least that's how she is presented to the new Mrs. De Winter. And the new Mrs. De Winter is young, and most of the book is written, she's the narrator, well, the whole book is written as a narration. A lot of it is written from the perspective of what she's thinking in her mind. She is a character who has very low self-esteem, and she's very hard on herself. And there are a couple of different scenes in the book where her imagination kind of gets the better of her, and she imagines things to be much more dramatic and much more that people have, people think badly of her, and that she's not living up to people's expectations. So it's a really interesting book, and I think on a number of different levels. So as so many good books are, it explores a whole bunch of different topics within the telling of an excellent story with a very good plot. Of course, the whole time we're trying to figure out, who this Rebecca woman really was and what she was really like, and we're not sure what the truth is about her, and the truth gets revealed by the end of the novel, not just about her character, which gets revealed as we go along in the novel, but also about some mysteries surrounding her death. And there are a couple of different twists and turns. I don't want to give away too much of the plot, and I won't give away the plot. I mean, some people have a problem with the way this book ends. What I like about the ending of this book is that it's not predictable. So I didn't find this book was very predictable. Some people maybe did, but for me, it wasn't predictable. And the reveals that came near the end of the book were believable. So I find that often when a book has, a reveal, is often expected or predictable, or else it's just not believable, which is a problem I had with another book that I read this month. So yeah, I can't say enough about this book. And I will just make a special note for those people who are watching who are doing the Taylor Swift readathon. This is the group read for the Taylor Swift readathon because it's one of the books that satisfies the blank space prompt. And the blank space prompt says to read a book that Taylor Swift refers to. The song Tolerate It on Evermore is supposed to be based on Rebecca. But here's the other thing about this book, and I have a theory, all you Swifties out there, is that this book heavily references Alice in Wonderland. So the main character, maybe I should call her Alice, because I think she's like supposed to be like a little bit like Alice in Wonderland. I mean, it is this idea of this person, kind of this young person being swept up and taken off to this estate and living this very grand lifestyle that they are not, that they don't necessarily fit into and are not necessarily prepared for. And she does harden over the course of the book. She goes from being innocent to being a little bit tougher over the course of the book. But I don't know, it makes me think about the royal family as well. And because Harry and Meghan just did their interview with Oprah, and it makes me think about that idea. I'll read you a passage in a minute that made me think about that. But back to my theory about Alice in Wonderland. So it is this kind of idea that, you know, you've gone down this kind of rabbit hole, and there are a lot of mysteries and you can't figure things out, and things don't make any sense. A lot of the experiences that our main character has don't make any sense to her, and she doesn't understand them. So, and in one of the scenes, there's a fancy dress ball, which is like a costume ball or a costume party, and people get dressed up. Well, I should back it up a minute. So one of the characters, who's the housekeeper of Manderley, is this character, Mrs. Danvers. And Mrs. Danvers doesn't like the new Mrs. De Winter, my Alice, because she thinks she's a poor stand-in for Rebecca, the original Mrs. De Winter, and she very much adored Rebecca and had been with her since Rebecca was a child. And she is scary, like in this book. I mean, Daphne du Maurier is like a queen at creating ambiance and creating tension, and she is terrifying. And she kind of terrorizes our protagonist. And I'll just read you I'll read you first a scene about how our protagonist feels. So she's talking about a little game that she played as a child. I think it's called Grandmother's Steps, but I'll just read you the excerpt. So she says, even if I turned in my chair and looked up to the windows, I could not see her. She's referring to Mrs. Danvers. I would not see her. I remembered a game I had played as a child that my friends next door had called Grandmother's Steps, and myself, Old Witch. You had to stand at the end of the garden with your back turned to the rest, and one by one they crept nearer to you, advancing in short, furtive fashion. Every few minutes you turned to look at them, and if you saw one of them moving, the offender had to retire to the back line and begin again. But there was always one a little bolder than the rest, who came up very close, whose movement was impossible to detect, and as you waited there, your back turned, counting the regulation 10, you knew with a fatal, terrifying certainty that before long, before even the 10 was counted, this bold player would pounce upon you from behind, unheralded, unseen, with a scream of triumph. I felt as tense and expectant as I did then. I was playing Old Witch with Mrs. Danvers. So that really struck me. But yes, so Mrs. Danvers really torments our protagonist, and she convinces her to dress up for the ball. I won't want to reveal the whole thing, but our protagonist had the idea of Alice in Wonderland, and later on during the ball, when she decides to go out, change out of her costume because the costume wasn't acceptable, she dresses in a little blue dress as the character Alice in Wonderland did. So it makes me think that there's a parallel obviously being made between Alice in Wonderland and the protagonist in Rebecca. And of course, Taylor Swift in her song makes me think of that song, what's the name of it? Down the Rabbit Hole. Clear reference to Alice in Wonderland, and then Daphne du Maurier clearly references Alice in Wonderland, and wow, it's like a whole thing. What else? So yeah, Daphne du Maurier's writing is just exceptional. The pacing of the book is really good. The part that made me think about being in a really in high society and feeling trapped in high society and being observed by everyone, and then also feeling like you're kind of like there's a puppet master and you're playing you're playing the role for the public. That theme is definitely present in Rebecca, and it really came to my mind because, as I said, of watching the interview with Harry and Meghan. And this just describes how she was feeling during the ball. It's about how she interacted with Max, who's her husband, De Winter. So she says, he never spoke to me. He never touched me. We stood beside one another, the host and the hostess, and we were not together. I watched his curtsy to his guests. He flung a word to one, a jest to another, a smile to a third, a call over his shoulder to a fourth. And no one but myself could know that every utterance he made, every movement was automatic and the work of a machine. We were like two performers in a play, and we were divided. We were not acting with one another. We had to endure it alone. We had to put up this show, this miserable sham performance for the sake of all these people I did not know and did not want to see again. So it's sort of, it's a bit depressing, this poor girl. She, there's one scene where Mrs. Danvers tries to convince her that she's nothing and that she's worthless. And she really believes it. Yeah, I really felt for the main character. I mean, I think a lot of people say, this book is just full of characters that are not likable, but I really felt for the main character in the way that she was written. Despite the fact that near the end, I don't want to give the ending away, but near the end, I was pretty shocked with our main character, but I don't want to give it away, so... I don't know. I'm still not sure how I feel about spoilers. No spoilers. The one thing I will say that's disappointing about this book, and it's not surprising, and it is disappointing, I think, in general for books that were written at this time, but it does have some really cringy moments of racism. There's one of the characters dresses up as somebody from the Middle East, or actually a couple dresses up as a couple from the Middle East, and they go in brown face, which is just so cringy. Of course, makes me think of Prime Minister Trudeau and hit the photos of him in blackface, which is just so cringy of this, the elite white upper class continuing to do that and the racism that exists. Really wish that, but I guess it's reflective of the times. So if there's anything really negative to say about it, I guess it's that. And also, I didn't really understand the epilogue. Maybe somebody can explain to me in the epilogue, because the husband seems to be referred to in the epilogue as Henry, which got me so confused. I really don't know what's going on there. So maybe somebody can explain that to me in the comments below. Hopefully that wasn't too long-winded. I adored this book. It was very, 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 very good. And I will read anything Daphne du Maurier writes. So next up, okay, so this actually is a book that I wanted to talk about that is not in... it's not part of the Tis the Damn Readathon. Should I still talk about it? Yeah, I should still talk about it. I'm very proud of myself because I read a French book. So one of my goals this year is going to be to read a French book every quarter, I think. It moved along. It's very plot driven. It's called Le Soleil de Scorta by Laurent Gaude. And it's about an Italian family. And it's really follows several different generations of an Italian family in a small town in southern Italy. Explores a lot of different themes, like family legacy, about the meaning of a person's life, about the relationship between people and the earth and nature, and how connected we are to... And also the church. So there's quite a bit of commentary about the church. There's a lot to unpack with this little book. And it is written in French. So, I mean, if I was going to read some quotes to you, they would be in French. And I don't know if you guys want to hear me read in French. Maybe I'll do a separate review of this. I don't know if there's anybody out there who wants to try reading in French. But if you wanted to start somewhere, I'd say this would be a really good place to start. It's an excellent, excellent novel. And it's very touching, very moving. I'll read you something just about the idea that they talk about here. One of the sisters in a family of brothers, the only sister, and she's talking about like the meaning of her life as an old lady. She goes to the priest and she's talking to him about how she's losing her mind and how about the meaning of life. And she says, and I'll just read it in French and then I'll say what it is in English. She says, quel sens à tout cela? Ces vies construites lentement, patiemment, si I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right, patiemment, avec volonté et abnégation. Ces vies balayées d'un coup par le vent du malheur, ces promesses de joie auxquelles on rêve et qui se déchirent. Vous savez ce qui est le plus étonnant dans tout cela, dans Salvador? Je vais vous le dire. So she's just saying, like, what is there in all of this? You come into the world and you believe that you're going to make something really important of your life, and then something happens that's out of your control that throws everything off. That's what she means when she says "c'est vie balayée d'un coup par le vent du malheur," like by a stroke of bad luck. Your life gets batted by a stroke of bad luck, and that there are promises of happiness and joy that you dream about that can get ripped away from you. I mean, it's very poetically written in French, and it's quite a beautiful book, and it brings up a lot of things to think about. Anyhow, I won't continue to read to you in my not so great French. This is an excellent book, and I would recommend it if anybody wants to try reading something in French. It's a wonderful little book called Passing, which I've read ahead of, because my 5-star prediction is The Vanishing Half, and I've heard that The Vanishing Half is based on this little novel, so I wanted to read it first. I guess this could be like the one that has red on the cover. I noticed that little after I'd picked something else. This is Passing by Nella Larsen. It's an astonishing little novel about two friends who grew up together in the 1920s, and they are both light-skinned enough to pass. I guess passing was the term used for people who were passing as white, but were African American. So these two characters, these two women, Irene and Claire, have lost touch, and Claire is the friend who has presented herself as white and has gone on to live as a white woman and married a white man who does not know that she's African American. Irene is her friend who is part of the African American community in Harlem, and is a very active part of that community, as the book describes. And it's about their relationship, and it's a friendship that instigated and pursued by Claire, and Irene isn't welcome or doesn't want to have this friendship, although she doesn't really do anything to really cut Claire off. At a moment in the book, she kind of realizes how easy it would be to disconnect from Claire and to cut herself off from Claire, but she doesn't do it. So she has this kind of strange relationship with Claire, which I think is a mirror maybe for this idea of the relationship to the idea of passing. So of course it's about racial identity, and I think the first passage I'll read is a kind of a commentary by Irene on the idea of passing, what it brings up for her. I think it's fairly telling. So in a conversation that she's having with her husband's name is Brian. This is Irene. She's talking about this notion of passing in the context of this friend of hers, Claire. And she says, it's funny about passing. We disapprove of it and at the same time condone it. It excites our contempt, and yet we rather admire it. We shy away from it within an odd kind of revulsion, but we protect it. So there's a lot of conversation in the book about race. There's a lot of writing about safety and security, and in particular how to protect Claire and her daughter from being found out, which is something that Irene grapples with, because she runs into Claire's husband on the street at one point, and she believes that she was recognized by him. So there's a lot of concern about security, and the relationship itself is really interesting to read about. So there's obviously this book packs a punch. In and of itself, it's a very good story about friendship, about identity, of course, and it has a feeling of intimacy between these two friends, as well. And also there's a suggestion that Claire starts to spend more and more time with Irene, and she comes and would spend time up in Harlem with Irene and socialize with her and her friends. And Irene sort of resents this woman, and I think at some point it is suggested that she is having an affair with her husband, or that her husband is, there's a possibility of that. So I won't talk about the ending, because the ending is to say that I think that the ending was really good, and I have my own opinions about the ending, but I highly recommend this book. It's obviously a 5-star. I'm just wondering if I should read another little excerpt for you. I wanted to read this excerpt about race because I thought it was really telling. It talks a lot about, it has a lot of commentary about race, and also about being a woman. So there's this double whammy of being a woman and being affected by race. I mean, there's one scene that's really heartbreaking and difficult to read. It's a conversation between 3 women where Claire's husband comes into the room and he says all of these terrible things, all of these racist comments, thinking that these women are white, they're passing. So but I won't read that. I just wanted to read a reflection that Irene has near the end of the book, where she describes herself as being caught between 2 allegiances. She's thinking about, outing Claire. A lot of the book is sort of, shouldn't she out Claire? She doesn't want to continue to be friends with her, and she wants to find a way to kind of deal with it. She's hoping Claire's supposed to leave in March, so she's kind of holding out until their family leaves New York and she doesn't have to spend time with her anymore. But she's also feeling impatient about it. So she describes herself as being caught between 2 allegiances, different yet the same: herself, her race. The thing that bound and suffocated her. Whatever steps she took, or if she took none at all, something would be crushed. A person or the race, Claire herself or the race. Or it might be all 3. Nothing, she imagined, was ever more completely sardonic. Sitting alone in the quiet living room in the pleasant firelight, Irene Redfield wished for the first time in her life that she had not been born a Negro. For the first time, she suffered and rebelled because she was unable to disregard the burden of race. It was, she cried silently, enough to suffer as a woman, an individual, on one's own account, without having to suffer for the race as well. It was a brutality and undeserved. And I just thought that was so powerful. And it's just interesting because this book was written in the 1920s, and I think it just has so much still to present for us to think about now. Here's a little description of Claire, which I thought was really telling as well. She says, the trouble with Claire was not only that she wanted to have her cake and eat it too, but that she wanted to nibble at the cakes of other folks as well. So Claire's not really presented as a very likable character. I think there's also supposed to be some suggestion of a deeper, intimate relationship between the 2 of them, but I didn't quite get that myself from the book. Maybe I need to reread it. So yes, such a good book. 5 out of 5. I think that's going to be it for today. I was going to talk about Sanatorium, but I'll leave it and I'll talk about it in my part 2 wrap up. Assuming that I'm going to finish this one by Zadie Smith, The Vanishing Half, The Sanatorium, and Wuthering Heights, which I'm reading right now. I'm thinking about reading Circe as well. So let's see how the rest of the month goes. I hope you've enjoyed this video. And thanks for spending this time with me. Please put any thoughts, comments. Maybe I missed some things. If I don't know if there are interesting points that you'd like to make about any of these books. Please join the conversation in the comments below. Yeah, if you like this video, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you don't like this video, you just keep it to yourself. Bye. Next up is The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. Oh, I'm not gonna, I guess, was I gonna say what the prompts were that I used? This was a prompt for, I marked a whole bunch of different things, but I don't know why. I'll just read you this excerpt. was a bad time. It's my head. I'm not going to sing because my singing is not so good.